this video, I'm going to show you a bunch of old gear that I've picked up over the years and show you how I've got it all connected in a project in Cubase so that when I press play, all of these devices are playing at the same time and the sound is coming into my audio interface all at once. So I've got all this hardware hooked up through some sort of MIDI connection and then some kind of audio connection. And you could do this kind of stuff too, even if you didn't have an audio interface with lots of inputs. Just get yourself a mixer, a cheap little mixer, get that off Craigslist, plug all that stuff in and get going with it and try to have some fun, maybe with some hardware that you've already got kicking around your studio, and maybe not. Maybe you want to get into this collecting thing as well. So I better just say one little caveat though, and this whole video started because on the weekend I won an auction for an Alesis Nanoverb, a little tiny reverb device. And I thought, oh, that'd be fun. I'll hook it up to some of my, like my Juno or something like that. Didn't come with a power supply. I won it. It ended up costing me like $65. I get home, plug it in. Of course, it doesn't work. So you do get that kind of situation often, but I was so frustrated with it, I just decided to make this video and let that frustration channel some kind of content for you, my viewers. So let me know in the comments if you have got some real gems, and especially for really great prices, because the truth is I haven't paid a ton for most of these synths that I buy on Craigslist or at these auctions. It's just looking and looking and looking and then hoping and looking some more. People ask me when I did my Polybrute video, what's the point of having a piece of hardware, a hardware synthesizer in your studio when virtual instruments are just so much more convenient? You can have so much more of them in your project, and usually they're a lot more powerful. Having a piece of hardware in your hands and working with it, the tactile thing, has become way more important to me over the years, and to be honest, it all started with the machine. So the fact that I can use a piece of software that is integrated so beautifully with hardware has really changed the way I create music. And I'm not saying that because I am a machine poster boy, because most of you know that I am, but I love the thing. I love that connection, that synergy. So having some kind of synthesizer that does the same thing is really magical to me as well. And I'm finding that with the Polybrute, not just saying that because I'm good friends with Arturia. They don't pay me, by the way, but somebody got really mad at me and said, they do pay you. They send you synthesizers. And it's true. They send me synthesizers. So hope you guys are cool with that, because I am not going to be turning down these synthesizers anytime soon. And they also send me things like this little cardboard Micro Freak, which is a card. Yeah, that's Arturia. Love them. So let's get into it. I'll show you the gear, walk you through that stuff. Then we'll check out the song, the connections, what I'm doing in Cubase, and then listen to the tune at the end. All right, so one of my first synths that I bought off Craigslist is the JX3P, the Roland JX3P. Beautiful synthesizer, has ways of accessing all of the parameters inside, like envelopes and LFOs and stuff and filters, but you have to use this kind of key map right here and then go adjust things with the slider right here, and you get to access each individual setting with one slider. So it's kind of a pain to edit with. There is a programmer for this synthesizer that you can plug in the back, and then you'd have knobs for all of these controls. I'd love to find it, but I still haven't found it yet. So if anybody has one for me, you can send it to me. It's a beautiful synthesizer. I absolutely love it. It sounds a lot like my Juno. It's programmable. You can go and change your sounds yourself, make your sounds yourself. It's got presets, whole load of 4 banks of presets of 16 each, and it's polyphonic. So we have multiple voices on it. That's the 3P. This, of course, my Fender Rhodes, one of my favorite purchases I've ever made. I've used it in a bunch of videos, and I got this for $650 plus all the auction fees and everything, and didn't even know if it worked, but didn't care because I was just happy to have an antique in my studio. Got it shipped to me, and when I plugged it in, I could tell that it was making sound. The tines all looked amazing inside, and I just had to order one cable from Vintage Vibe, and they sent me this cable. It was $50, so it was an expensive cable. Plugged it in and it worked. So you'll see that in lots of videos. I've already used it a bunch, but absolutely love that Rhodes. Probably my favorite purchase ever. I've got a couple things here. I've got the Korg, Micro Korg. Got that one on Craigslist. Had to buy the vocoder mic, but that was very cheap. I've also got the Juno 6. And the Juno 6, another one of my Craigslist finds. Absolutely love this synthesizer. It doesn't have MIDI hookup, so unfortunately I don't get to use this one as much as I'd like, but it is just a beautiful machine to have in the studio. And as you can see, I've got the Juno 6 shirt. It's actually a Juno 60 shirt. If you want to get one, go to redbubble.com. I just kind of blacked out the 0 because I don't have a Juno 60, but yeah. Next, we've got the Korg D1, and I think this came out in the 80s. Digital drums. Oops. And if you listen carefully, I do have a Pat Boone, Debbie Boone drum fill in this song. Dr. Mix did a great video on this little drum machine, so go check out his video. It only has one drum kit on it, and if I want more drum kits, I have to get the RAM card, and this one's kind of broken, but hey, I'm using it in the song here, and it works with MIDI, and the outputs work, so it's better than I can say for that darn reverb device that started this whole thing off. So of course over here, no synth collector's collection would be complete without the Casio SK1 sampling keyboard. And I have yet to use this in a video, but doesn't have MIDI, so if you want to use it, doesn't have an analog output either, so you'd actually have to mic the darn thing to get it to work. But yeah, this is one of those first sampling keyboards. So when you're ready to sample, you hold down the sampling button. Sounds like something's actually kind of broken on it, but here we go. Hey! And then of course you can press the demo button and hear your beautiful sample. Yeah, so that's the Casio SK1 demo song, which I will say my wife has completely memorized, like note for note. It's quite scary, but apparently she had one when she was a kid. So that's the SK1, beautiful, beautiful sampling device. So this one here, Korg Poly 800. This was a really neat find, got it for about 75 bucks, and it's an analog synthesizer. Sounds great. We can store patches in it, and we can recall patches and all the usual stuff. We can change, I had to change the tuning pretty harshly on this one because it was quite out of tune, but yeah, nice little analog synthesizer. Okay, so here we've got the DX7, and underneath we've got the Casio CZ3000. And the CZ3000 got on Craigslist, and I've got a whole video where I compare this to the Arturia CZ synthesizer, so make sure you go check that. I'll put a link in the description. And I've also used the DX7 in the Arturia comparison, so I'll put links to those. And DX7, classic synth. I don't think I really need to say much about it other than it is you know, an industry standard, or was, for the 80s and the 90s, and it sounds great. It works really well. I had to get somebody to replace the battery, but I got this at a pawn shop for 400 bucks, which was a pretty good deal up here in Canada. So that's kind of it for the synthesizers that I've purchased, and now what we'll do is we'll go and have a look at the song and what I did with these, with a bunch of these instruments anyways. So let's go. So let's look at the pieces of gear that I've got hooked up in this song. To start with, I've got the Polybrute, and that one's just doing this beautiful patch and just synced up the delay to the tempo of the song, and then I've got it all connected up here with the Polybrute Connect software. So if you watch my Polybrute video, you'll see how this works, and that just means any changes I make to the patch are just automatically going to get saved in the software, so I can go and play around with the Polybrute in a totally different song, come back to this song. Once I connected it, will send the exact same patch settings back to this device, and it'll work perfectly. And for this one, I'm using the Polybrute Connect software. Beautiful piece of software. Watch my Polybrute video so you can see how this works. And all it means is any changes I make to this one specific patch in here will get saved with the project, and I don't have to save any settings on the synthesizer itself. When we get over to Cubase, I should mention something. There's something called external instruments that we can use in Cubase Pro. And I'm going to put a link to a video by Chris Sellum. This guy does an amazing video on setting up external instruments in Cubase, so I'm not going to reinvent that video for you. I'll put a link to it, follow his instructions, and I did exactly what he's doing in that video on each one of these patches. So I'll put a link to that in the description, but the way it works is you're basically setting up an external instrument in your studio as if it is like a virtual instrument. So when I press F4 here, you're going to see that I have a bunch of external instruments already set up. So I've got my JX3P, I've got the Microfreak over here, I've got the Sub-25, and so on. So with the JX3P right here, if I click this little drop down, you'll see that the audio is going into my audio interface, which I'm using a Focusrite Claret. I do have 8 inputs on this audio interface. If you didn't have that, if you only had a stereo input, what you could do is get a mixer and run all of your different synthesizers into a mixer. That goes into your audio interface. And then when it comes time to bounce your audio, you would just solo each track individually, record them, and get away with only having 2 inputs, say, on an audio interface. So 8 inputs is great in this scenario because I've got everything going into all 8 inputs at the same time. And so here you can see I've got my JX3P set up, and then if I go up to Studio, More Options, MIDI Device Manager, that's where I've got my installed MIDI devices, or I just made them. So all I did is go Install Device, Define New, and then I made my instrument just the way that Chris walks you through in that video. So that's how I've got it all hooked up, and each one of them is hooked up to a different MIDI input. Like the Poly 800 here is hooked up to a MIDI interface I've got that just goes through a USB cable into the computer. I've got other devices like the Polybrute, the Microfreak, and the Sub-25 that have USB connections, so those just go USB to the computer. I've got this drum machine right here is hooked up through one MIDI cable that goes to my machine. And that's all I'm using Machine for. So sometimes you got to get creative. If you think, I don't have another MIDI interface, well, this thing's got MIDI on it. So you might have other devices that actually have MIDI ports on them, and you could use those as a way of getting MIDI into another program. So now let's just go look at the different patches. I've got the DDD1 right here at the top. Really great sounding 80s drums. Don't need to do a whole lot to them. I put some EQ on them and a ton of reverb through the round reverb. Probably too much, but whatever. Next, I've got the JX3P, and JX3P, this lush sounding pad. And so, of course, all this MIDI information is just going to that thing. Right now, the audio is coming out of it and going into my audio interface. Then I've got my Microfreak Burly Bass. This one is a really fun patch. Just tweaked this one on my own from the initialized patch. So the pitch bend on this one is set to an octave, which is one of my favorite settings for it. Next, I've got the Polybrute in here as well, and that's just a beautiful little patch that I put some delay on and then sync the delay to the tempo of the project. And I've got the Sub-25 in here as well. And with the Sub-25, I set this one up as an external instrument. And then because Moog sends us not only the subsequent editor as a virtual instrument, they also send you one as an audio insert. So what I've done is I've loaded up this subsequent editor as an audio insert on my instrument track. So the instrument track takes care of the MIDI back and forth, and it takes care of where the sound is coming into the computer. But then once I put this subsequent editor on as an insert effect, now everything I do with this little guy right here will get saved with the project as well. So if I turn the filter right here, you can see that it changes on the software itself. So here is my subsequent editor, and you can see how the filter is changing throughout the song. And since we don't have an audio insert effect for the Polybrute, the way I've got it set up here is I've got an instrument track that I just choose the Polybrute virtual instrument, and technically it's not really a virtual instrument, it's more of a controller. But if I go to Arturia, there you can see the Polybrute Connect. So that's how I've started this one out, loaded up as an instrument track. The downside of not having that audio insert effect like we have with the Moog is I just need to make an audio track for the return. So I can't set it up as an external instrument when I want to use this Polybrute Connect. If somebody knows a different way to do this inside Cubase, let me know. But as far as I know, that's the only way that we can do this kind of setup. So I've got an audio track with my return of the Polybrute right here, and then I've got my Polybrute track with the MIDI information here with the instrument on it. So that's kind of the most complex setup of the bunch, but the rest of them are all following these external instruments. If I press F4 and look at my external instruments, this only shows up in Cubase Pro, by the way. And if you don't have Cubase Pro, guess what? You could do everything just like this. Just set it up as an instrument track or as a MIDI track with an audio track as a return. So it's not a big deal. And then the beautiful thing about using these external instruments is we can take something like this Microfreak chunk right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this render in place setting in Cubase. Chris walks you through this whole thing as well, but I'm just going to go up to Edit and choose Render in Place, and we'll render it with the current settings. And I'm going to render that onto an audio track, and it's going to include all of the effects that I've got on this external instrument track, but it'll bounce it down to audio so that I can then mix down the entire song. Because don't forget, I can't just go export audio like we normally do with a virtual instrument, because this is all just happening in real time. So this export takes place in real time. It has to actually send the information to the synthesizer. The audio right now is going into the audio interface and getting turned into an audio file behind the scenes. You can't hear it. And then now we can see it right here. It's muted the top information. And then if we click the E button for this audio track, this render, we can see that it's put my reverb on it, and it's put the EQ curve that I had on the original track. So I can go and change that later if I want to as well. I hope this was fun. I hope you enjoyed watching this kind of thing in the process. I'm going to go through and play the song, let you hear it, and maybe get you inspired to try some of this stuff out for yourself. Maybe start looking through those classified ads and see if you can find synths in your area as well.